Hello, and you're very welcome back to Shattered Lives. I'm Ciaran Bradley. The murder trial of Gerry the Monk Hutch has resumed for another week in Dublin's Special Criminal Court. Mr. Hutch is accused of the murder of David Byrne at the Regency Hotel in February 2016. It is a charge that he denies. Being tried alongside Mr. Hutch are two men, Jason Bonney and Paul Murphy. The state alleges that Messrs Murphy and Bonney provided vehicles for the Regency murder. Both men deny the charges against them. To bring us up to date with the goings-on is our man in court, Chief Reporter for the Irish Daily Star, Paul Healy. Paul, how you keeping?
How's it going, Ciaran?
Not three bad, as they say. I have to apologise in advance to both yourself and the listeners because my voice is on its very last legs. I have to admit, I was at the Shattered Lives derby that was the Mancunian derby on Saturday, and in shouting at Michael O'Toole's ilk, I have I've left it on the table. So, but Paul, back onto matters that actually matter. You were in court once again today. You might just bring us up to date with what's been happening.
Yeah, so we're in the 11th week of the trial now, and like everything, you start off the day kind of wondering what's going to come up next, because there's been developments here and there. Out of nowhere, and yet again matters have fallen from the sky, is the way it was put today. There was another curious development, allegedly. So just to discuss this briefly again, the previous week, last week, the so-called curious development was mentioned in court, although it wasn't said exactly what it was. But there were subsequently reports in relation to somebody coming forward, a prisoner coming forward and confessing to his alleged involvement in the Regency shooting. So that was a matter that was dealt with, and it's something that has to have at this stage been dealt by the court. But it was mentioned again today in tandem with another so-called curious development. So I'll deal with that first. So the prosecuting counsel Sean Gillan said that there had been another development in which a email had been sent to an email address connected to the Central Criminal Court, I think to a registrar of the Central Criminal Court, but it was addressed to this court, the Special Criminal Court. We don't know what's in this email and what it says, but it's something that's of interest, and it has been brought to the attention of the defence as well. But we don't know what it is, and it wasn't said in court what it is, and I don't know what it is either at this point in time. So Miss Justice Tara Burns actually referenced the previous curiosity and admitted that she now knows what that is. She called it a surprise. We now know what that surprise is. She said that we couldn't avoid hearing about it over the weekend. Now, I think that's interesting. I don't know how Miss Justice Tara Burns and the other two judges heard about it, and I wouldn't want to speculate, but I would point out that there were media reports, including ourselves, about this alleged confession from a prisoner to his involvement in the Regency Hotel. It wasn't said in court, and it still hasn't been said in court, but Miss Justice Tara Burns said that she's now aware of it and couldn't help but have found out about it over the course of the weekend. So I just thought that was interesting and worth noting. But we moved on today. Again, this new curious development was not referred to, and it wasn't said what it was. And we have no idea whether it'll impact the trial at all. But I'm getting the sense that it won't, because Brendan Grehan, defending for Mr. Hutch, said that indicated that it wasn't a matter of concern. So maybe it's something again, like the other thing, that might have to be looked at externally outside of the case by An Garda Síochána. Might not have anything to do with this particular case at all.
And I might just ask, I realise obviously that we've had these two instances now, and you mentioned last week that the first curiosity in this curiosity shop was not likely to undermine the case in any sense. You may not know this, but is there anything that through the course of a criminal trial can stop it from happening? Has there been outside interference in sort of any recent Irish cases to your mind, whether something similar has happened? Or, I mean, it may well be the case that it's not.
No, and I'll be careful how to... I mean, sure, something could happen that could collapse a trial for sure, yeah, but I mean, nothing of that. We're not getting any indication where that's something of this nature. I mean, if we recall the case of Patrick Hutch Jr., who was accused of the murder of David Byrne, and that was a special criminal court trial, a matter did happen externally of that case that completely resulted in the collapse of that case, which was the tragic death of Superintendent Colin Fox, who was leading the investigation. And with his passing, the case couldn't proceed, and a null prosequi was entered, and the case didn't proceed, didn't go ahead. And Patrick Hutch Jr. was released from prison, where he was on remand for nearly 2 years, I believe. So that was something that happened externally, but that was something extraordinary and very tragic, obviously, and happened externally. This, we don't know what this is. And it's nothing on that level of severity, obviously, because we'd already know about it.
Yeah.
Look, I'm being careful because I don't, it's still a trial. I know we have freedom to talk about it, but I don't know what this information or curiosity, as they've called it, is. So I wouldn't want to speculate further than that.
No speculation, but actually that leads us somewhat nicely on with the mention of Mr. Hutch Jr. So I believe his name was a real focus today.
Yeah, well, this possibly was the most, for us, maybe interesting thing to discuss that came out of today, in that we got a little bit more information about the incident in which Patrick Hutch Jr. was shot in the leg in a so-called punishment shooting. I just think this is really interesting that something like this happened in the modern day. I suppose, like, you've heard of kneecapping, with the IRA and that, but it's unusual for us to hear of anything like this happening in south of the border, in gangland, where a person is shot in the leg as a punishment. But this is what happened to Patrick Hutch Jr., and it's because in Marbella in Spain in 2014, I think, the boxer Jamie Moore was shot. Now, he survived that, but it was an attempt on Daniel Kinahan. It was supposed to be an attempt on Daniel Kinahan, and the Kinahans blamed Gerry Hutch and his brother Patrick for that. And we've gone over this before, but there was a tentative agreement of €200,000 to be paid, and then Patrick Hutch Jr. would be shot in the leg as punishment, and Gerry Hutch would be dealt with as well in some way. But the sides were trying to come to some sort of agreement rather than all-out war. Of course, we know what happened. But Patrick Hutch Jr., the allegation was, and it was reported in the media at the time, and obviously we'd heard it before, this allegation that Daniel Kinahan himself carried out this shooting, that it happened by appointment, and then Patrick was brought to the hospital and never made a complaint. What was of interest today is that we heard from Detective Superintendent David Gallagher. He was recalled to the stand, so we've heard from him already earlier in the case. He's a very senior member of Garda Síochána with the National Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau, and has extensive knowledge of gangland and both sides, and he has already spoken about his expertise on that. But today he was recalled to speak about the murder of Gerry Hutch, the shooting of Patrick Hutch Jr., murder of Eddie Hutch, and the shooting of Jamie Moore, and just his knowledge of the background of those incidents. And what was of interest to me is that he said that this investigation into Patrick Hutch Jr.'s shooting is still an open investigation, still something that they are investigating. Despite the fact that Patrick Hutch Jr. refused to cooperate, he said, wouldn't cooperate with Gardaí and didn't make any formal complaint. But he said independently of that, they had recovered, I think, a bullet casing from a vehicle. So they were able to independently verify and establish that a shooting had happened. And obviously then Patrick Hutch had a gunshot injury, a proven gunshot injury, because he'd gone to the Mater Hospital to be treated in relation to it. So they're still investigating that. I don't know whether anything will come of it. But we've heard Jonathan Dowdall say on the witness stand that his understanding was that Daniel Kinahan carried it out. And we've heard, previously reported from sources, certainly Gardaí believe that Daniel Kinahan carried out the shooting. So to find out that it's still under investigation, I suppose it's one of a multitude of investigations now that Daniel Kinahan is facing. We know that he's under active Garda investigation for a number of things in connection with, for example, an attempt on James Mago Gately's life. There is a connection there in relation to Kinahan. He's under investigation for that. And then we know, of course, the US, the DEA are investigating Kinahan, and there's a reward out from the Treasury Department for information that could lead to Kinahan's prosecution. So this is another thing now that I think we can safely say that the Gardaí are investigating, still actively investigating. I don't know how it's progressing, but that was an interesting tidbit that came out of today from the mouth of a very senior Garda, So that's why it's worth noting. Even though it's got nothing really to do with the case against Gerry Hutch, it's just contextualizing, I suppose, all of the background to all of this. But for we already heard Jonathan Dowdall talk about how he believed that incident with Patrick Hutch kind of sparked the Kinahan Hutch feud, and he turned it around and basically tried to say that the Kinahans weren't the ones that started the feud, that it was the Hutches, because Gary and Patrick had allegedly conspired in some way to rob and then shoot Daniel Kinahan, and the whole thing was actually started by them, he claimed, and that's what started the whole thing. And we know that as a result of the murder of Gerry Hutch and an attempt on Gerry Hutch, the Regency incident then happened, and that so that's important to contextualize all of that, I suppose, in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one question in relation to the bullet casing that was recovered. Do we know when and where that was recovered? I'm not sure if that's information you can give out.
I think there was a vehicle involved, and they recovered it from a vehicle, but I don't know more detail than that was said. But I mean, that's obviously significant that that it's still an open investigation, because oftentimes when an injured party is not willing to make a complaint, that's kind of the end of the matter. There's some suggestion that they're still willing to progress it to a particular point in the future, maybe. And also, he mentioned the murder of Eddie Hutch. So we know that was 3 days after the Regency, and Detective Gallagher said that no one had been prosecuted in relation to that. But he was asked by Brendan Grehan, did they have suspects? And he said that a number of people had been questioned in relation to it. And Brendan Grehan asked him, are these suspects in the jurisdiction? And he said he would prefer not to answer that question. Oh, look, it's obviously a sensitive.
Read into that what you will, really. I mean,
Yeah.
it could be.
It's a sensitive Garda investigation. But I suppose, the Hutches, much like the Kinahans, not long after this incident happened, they had people in mind that they believed were responsible in some way. And they were going after and speaking about people that they thought were involved. We know from the tapes that were heard in evidence in this case, Jonathan Dowdall and Gerry Hutch speaking about Trevor Byrne, a Kinahan cartel associate, and about the possibility of placing a bomb under a place that he was living in Wexford at the time. And, he was one of a number of individuals that the Hutches blamed, that the Hutch gang blamed for alleged involvement in the murder of Eddie Hutch. And we know that it has been reported that Trevor Byrne was a suspect in relation to that and was spoken to in relation to that. Now, he's serving a prison sentence for another matter. But there were a number of people involved in the murder of Eddie Hutch, and none of them have been brought to justice yet to date. But we've heard, still an open investigation as well.
Mm-hmm.
So those really were the kind of most interesting things about today. The other kind of thing of interest is that we finally got, I suppose, an indication as to when this is going to really wrap up, how soon this is actually going to wrap up, because it was another short half day today. But the prosecution is effectively done with its witnesses, really. We're going to hear a few more tomorrow, but it was indicated that Sarah Sked, who's a Garda who's involved in the analysis of phone technical evidence, and her evidence can be heard. She can be called to the stand on Thursday. So there's some sort of issue why she can't be called earlier. So Thursday she will be dealt with, and we've heard that she is likely to be the final witness for the prosecution. So the prosecution will rest its case effectively. Well, they'll have a final argument, but there will be no more witnesses after Thursday. So that will really be the end of the case. And after Sarah Sked's evidence, then we will have those final arguments from the defence and the prosecution, and then that'll be it. So at some point, I'd say next week at this stage, that's it. That'll be the final week of the trial. It'll probably take the full 5 days, I'd say, because you've got to hear from Paul Murphy, Jason Bonney's defence counsels, then you've got to hear from Brendan Grehan, and then from Sean Gallan as well, the prosecution. So we have to hear from each of those people individually, their final concluding arguments. And then who knows, because this case has still had spanners thrown in the works even right up to the final 2 weeks. So provided there's no more shockers, it'll be next week when it's all over.
Yeah, and just a reminder to everybody, when we were speaking to Mick last week, he was kind of tempering expectations, I suppose, about when we can likely expect a verdict. I mean, we're looking at weeks and months potentially, rather than hours and days.
That's a whole other story. We could be waiting at least 3 months.
Yeah.
There's a lot to consider, and the judges come back with a considered judgment. It's much more than just a verdict, as we've already spoken about. It's not that they just say guilty or not guilty. They have to give an explanation for their verdict. So that'll take time for them to put together. So there's a lot. But really, in terms of us talking about the day-to-day of this trial, expect certainly by the end of next week it'll be done and dusted.
Yeah. Okay. And any other observations or things?
I suppose it's just it briefly interesting just to mention the amount of phone evidence, technical evidence there is. It's not very easy to kind of live tweet or even put into copy writing about it. But we heard for quite a bit of time today from a senior Garda just going through each and every collection of phone data retention records in relation to different mobile phones that they seized from Patsy Hutch, from Jonathan Dowdall, from Jonathan Dowdall's father, and from his wife. And, all of that is central to their case. And also any phone calls that were coming into the Regency Hotel as well. So it just shows you, I suppose, the size, the scope of the case, like just the amount of material involved. Like it's we're bringing you highlights oftentimes, but I mean the judges have to comb through this, with a fine-tooth comb. All these phone numbers that are attached to these individuals, the phone calls, the text messages, and it'll be interesting to hear from Sarah Sked, because obviously, from her analysis, we've already heard a little bit about this, but I suppose we'll go into more detail of it on Thursday. She was able to determine that Dowdall's phone had pinged off a mast in the Navan Road area when he was alleging he was in Whitehall, and Gerry Hutch confessed to him in this park. But it also did prove that he was in the Whitehall area the day before at a different time of the day, and Dowdall had said that, okay, well, maybe that's when it happened. His recollection was that it happened on the Sunday, and it was earlier in the day. But all of that is hugely important for the case. So I mean, that's why they need to hear from her directly as to how that evidence is gathered and how they examine it. And I imagine that'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to hear a bit more about that. We're coming to the end of the trial now. So I don't expect that we're going to hear a whole lot more evidence. Thursday will be the interesting day when we hear from Sarah Sked on the phone evidence, and that will be the last real portion of the trial where there's new information coming forward, and then it'll all be concluding arguments, as I said, and that'll be it. We'll be done 12 weeks, exactly 12 weeks. That's exactly how long they said this trial would be.
Oh, yeah, impressive. You realise people are addicted to your live tweets now, so you're going to have to live tweet yourself going to the spa and get a chicken fillet roll. Might be the way to do it.
Yeah, no, life is much more mundane than this trial. But people are fascinated by it. It's been great to see. People are fascinated even by the more mundane stuff, even just the legal process and how it works. It's fascinating to me. That's why I enjoy covering it. It's fascinating to other people. I suppose it gives them an insight into how the legal system, the special criminal court works. And it really is fascinating. This trial has been hugely educational, I think, on that front. So
yeah, I'm always interested as to whether people, whether they're following something like this, they decide, what, I'm going to go to law school or these kind of things. So
yeah,
if you are listeners, let us know. But listen, Paul, again, thank you for your endeavours.
Thanks,
we hugely appreciate them, and we will speak to you all soon. Take care.
Thank you.